Hello everybody, and welcome back to Ancient Texts. I'm your host, Jeremy Richard, and I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look at one of the most famous Christmas card verses that quotes the ancient text. Because what's going on behind the scenes is a complete juxtaposition to what we're used to seeing on the Christmas card, and I think that's worth a video by itself. So, here's the Christmas card you've probably either sent or received yourself. Alright then. The Lord himself will give you the sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. This is one of the most famous prophecies in history, spoken over 700 years before the birth of Jesus. But what everybody fails to notice, including myself for many years, is exactly how this prophecy came about. It isn't even about the context, because it isn't a simple, hey, tell me about the Messiah, Isaiah. And Isaiah's like, yeah dude, a virgin will give birth to a baby. So what happened? Well, in today's video, we're going to be digging into events that happened around 750 BC. For some comparison of where we are in history, King Solomon died in 931 BC, or 130 years prior, and King Nebuchadnezzar will fight the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC and kick off the Babylonian captivity 150 years afterwards. One of the things I'm going to start highlighting in these videos are the people that lived during this time, as well as any key events. One of the challenges of the Old Testament is putting together a big picture and a flow of events and people, so hopefully this will help us all start to focus in on how events played out and by whom. So today we're going to be talking about King Ahaz and Isaiah. There are three notable figures that also lived during this time. Jonah, the guy you'll remember that is famous for being swallowed by a whale who was the first missionary, the prophet Zacharias, who has some amazing predictions of Jesus and other topics, and also King Uzziah, who was King Ahaz's grandfather. King Uzziah was the 10th ruler of Judah, the southern kingdoms, and reigned for 52 years. In the earlier part of his reign, under the influence of a prophet named Zechariah, he was faithful to God and did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. In Jerusalem, he made machines designed by skillful men to use on the towers and on the corner defenses to shoot arrows and hurl large stones. According to 2 Chronicles 26, Uzziah conquered the Philistines and the Arabians and received tribute from the Ammonites. He fortified the country, reorganized and re-equipped the army, and personally engaged in agricultural pursuits. He was a vigorous and able ruler, and his name was spread abroad even to the entrance of Egypt. But then he let his pride get in the way, and it was his downfall. He entered the temple of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to burn incense on the altar, and Azariah, the high priest, saw this as an attempt to usurp the prerogatives of the priests and confronted him with a band of 80 priests, saying, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense." In the meantime, a great earthquake shook the ground, and a rent was made in the temple, and the bright rays of the sun shone through and fell upon the king's face, insomuch that leprosy seized upon him immediately. He was then driven from the temple and forced to live in a separate house until his death. The duties of running the state were turned over to his son Jotham. In 740 BC, Tiglath-Pileser III took Arpad after a siege of 3 years and razed Hamath. Uzziah had been an ally of the king of Hamath, and thus was compelled by Tiglath to do him homage and pay yearly tribute. Tiglath is key to the setup for today's study of history, so that's the backstory. The main characters for today's video are the prophet Isaiah and King Ahaz, the king of Judah. Remember that Solomon's kids, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, fought a civil war which divided the country into two, with the righteous kings ruling in the kingdom of Judah in the south, and the more pagan kings ruling Israel in the north. King Pekah was the king of Israel, and King Rezin was the king of Aram, a country to the west of Israel. Those two kings were in league against King Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, and as you can see by the map, Assyria was the huge army on the block, equivalent of a pro football team, while Israel and Aram had much smaller armies whose equipment and training were more akin to a high school football team. King Ahaz was not a righteous king, and at this point in history he has a commander-in-chief conundrum. The kings of Israel and Aram were demanding that he join their side to fight against the Assyrians, or they will destroy the kingdom of Judah. King Tiglath of Assyria was demanding that he fight on his side against the kings of Israel and Aram, or he will destroy Judah. King Ahaz has no idea what to do, and instead of seeking God's counsel and direction first, which is what all good leaders did, the prophet Isaiah finds the king at the end of the aqueduct to the upper pool and proceeds to give him some unsolicited advice. He tells Ahaz not to worry about these kings, because they aren't going to destroy Judah, even going so far as to call them smoldering stumps of torches. Now, God knows Ahaz doesn't follow the law, so he has Isaiah tell him this: "Ask a sign from the Lord your God. Make it as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven above." Now, how many times have you or somebody you know asked God for a sign? And this guy is being told by God, hey, name your sign, anything, and I'll give it to you. How many of us would jump on that chance, especially if our faith wasn't that strong? But no, Ahaz remembers some theological training that he had back in grade school, and he tells Isaiah, nope, not going to do it, not going to put the Lord to the test. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is Ahaz trying to be righteous, because his logic was certainly correct, but I suspect it was more that he didn't want to hear what Isaiah was going to say next. But that didn't stop Isaiah, who then yells at him, must you also try the patience of my God? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Watch. So let's pause here and take a moment to put ourselves in Ahaz's shoes. He's well educated on his history, and he knows what possible signs are about to come out of Isaiah's mouth. What terrible omen is God about to fling upon him and the rest of Judah? Will it be a plague of locusts, fire and brimstone from the sky, a mighty sea split into two separate walls of water with dry land in the middle, a great and terrible earthquake, fire from heaven? And as all of this is rushing through King Ahaz's mind, Isaiah brings forth his terrible prophetic sign. The virgin will conceive a child, and will give birth to a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel. Wait, what? What does a virgin and a child have to do with Israel, Aram, Assyria with their mighty armies about to crush poor Judah and the price of a cup of tea in China? Do you see the juxtaposition of Isaiah's response and the prophecy given compared to the situation at hand? This is one of the ways you can verify that biblical prophecy is legitimate. It wasn't some dude making a prediction about the coming Messiah in some fancy synagogue setting. The text treats this as just part of the story, a part of the narrative. It doesn't draw attention to itself as a key prophecy. So did this verse actually impact King Ahaz in a meaningful way? Of course it did. Let's look at the whole statement. The virgin will conceive a child and will give birth to a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel. He'll eat cheese and honey, and when he knows enough to reject what's wrong and choose what's right. However, before the youth knows enough to reject what's wrong and choose what's right, the land whose two kings you dread will be devastated. So what he's telling Ahaz is that by the time the Messiah is born, and the problem that he's worried about will no longer exist and will not have been a problem for hundreds of years, he's telling him to relax and not worry about it. So that's the background of the verse. You don't need to understand the context to understand what the verse is saying, but realizing what's going on when it is said makes the prophecy orders of magnitude more interesting and compelling. But before we close, I'd like to take a look at a couple of quick ideas that support the virgin birth narrative. This is the first overt prophecy about the virgin birth. We know that. But there's a covert prophecy about it in Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Do you see the glaring problem with this statement? Science enthusiasts should pick up on it immediately. Women don't have seed. This is the first hint at a virgin birth. And finally, let's take a look at a Hebrew letter. In ancient Hebrew, pictographs for each letter didn't just represent a sound, called a phoneme, but they also represented an idea or concept called a sememe. For example, the letter Aleph means first, leader, or strength. If you combine Aleph with Bet, which means house, you get the leader of the house, the Hebrew word for Ab, which means father. You could, in theory, figure out what a word meant by the makeup of the letters and the ideas behind those letters that they represented. You can see that the early Hebrew pictograph for Aleph looks like an ox. So let's take a look at Nun. It means seed or heir, and I want to draw your attention to the early Hebrew pictograph for Nun. What does that look like to you? Remember, it means seed. Now, most scholars suggest the pictograph is that of a snake, and that would seem to fit with the ancient text and its propensity to discuss snakes, but to me it looks like a male sperm cell. Keep in mind that this pictograph of Nun is documented to be around many hundreds of years before Jesus, and certainly before 1677, when sperm cells were first discovered by Dutch scientist Antoine Philips van Leeuwenhoek. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind as you continue your studies of the ancient texts. Whoever wrote it sure did get lucky correlating that image to the Hebrew letter for seed. Until next time, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to support the channel.